Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Automate More Than Onboarding and Offboarding webinar with Torii. In this session, you'll discover how to leverage automation through the entire SaaS lifecycle, optimizing operations and ROI while minimizing risk. But before we get started, we have a few housekeeping rules. For an optimal connection, we recommend using computer audio in place of your telephone. All microphones are automatically set on mute to limit background noise. And please submit any questions through the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We will address all questions at the end. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Torii's information architect, John Baker. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, thank you, Tracy. Really appreciate that. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in this webinar. I know that webinars are a dime a dozen, but time is not. So I really appreciate you taking a little bit of your day to spend it with us. So over the course of this webinar, we're going to talk about automation, and we're going to start from the perspective of some recent research we did with a survey in association with Gartner Peer, the Gartner Peer community. And we're going to talk about some of the interesting responses we got, including why IT professionals said that automation sometimes fell flat, why it didn't really work out. And then we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about Torii, how Torii is designed from a philosophical perspective to address a lot of these underlying issues that we run into with the problems of automation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about an automation success story with one of our customers and how they were able to use Torii to automate a lot of the administrative tasks that were burdening the team. And then we'll wrap up today's webinar with a question and answer. So without further ado, I want to jump in, but I want to start with a quick and slightly embarrassing story. Now, about a year ago, my family, we moved into a new house. I have a wife and 4 kids, and our new home is out in the middle of nowhere. There is nothing but nature all around. And one of our projects over the summer has been starting to clear back some of the overgrowth. And that meant taking a section that we wanted to turn into our garden. Now, in this garden area, there was a root ball that we found, and that's essentially the root system left over from a tree after it's been cut down to the stump. Now, you can go about this with a hacksaw, a pickaxe, a crowbar, spend hours, but I'm an educated man, so I thought I'm going to use technology to my advantage. And there's a tool called a farm jack. It's great for pulling out fence posts. You wrap a chain around the base and you use the lever and you can pull these fence posts right out of the ground. So I thought I would try to use this technology to help me remove this root ball. So I got started and little things kept popping up. I wasn't able to get the chain to secure properly. So I had to use some construction screws. The base of the jack kept sinking into the dirt, and so I had to use planks of wood underneath to support it. And it started tipping because of the off-center nature of the center of gravity. And so I started bracing it with 2x4s. And so I'm coming to the end of this process. I'm about to get this root ball out of the ground when suddenly the jack starts to slip. And I didn't want to lose all of my hard-earned progress. There was a lot of tension in this jack. I really didn't want to fall. So I instinctively reach out to grab it. And in the process, I let go of this handle, this lever. Now, this lever is about 40 pounds of steel with a hinge at the base. And so it starts careening slowly until it smashes me between the eyes, crushing my nose, causing a fracture and causing me to bleed all over. And the worst part was that my family was all there watching me, pretending to be concerned, but maybe laughing a little bit because Dad was being an idiot, trying to pretend he knew how to deal with tools again. And so the end result was me with a busted nose, a little bit embarrassed. And that was my afternoon. And you might be wondering what this has to do with automation. But I would argue that you have also experienced a similar situation with a busted nose in relation to automation. Now, not a literal busted nose. This is obviously metaphorical. If you have experienced a literal busted nose dealing with software automation, I'd be very curious about the story. But you've probably experienced this in the form of your automation not working as expected. Just like me, you find yourself tweaking and adjusting and trying to get this to work out properly. It was supposed to be relatively effortless. It was supposed to be technology taking a 4-hour process and making it just minutes. That's not quite how it worked out. Maybe you thought you'd get some peace of mind from the implementation of this automation, but it's actually spawned into more sources of stress than it was ever worth initially. Or maybe you thought it would be a really simple setup, just like in that clean demo environment that you experienced, but it turns out it never quite worked out. It just kept going on and on. And I think if you've experienced that, if you felt it, you're not alone. In the recent research we did, we asked IT professionals about how successful they were with automation, and only 13% of the respondents said that they had experienced great success. For most people, the answer was kind of some success, limited success, or no success. That's a pretty low number for a form of technology that we've been dealing with for years. I think part of that low satisfaction stems from a misalignment of expectations when it comes to IT professionals versus what is actually being offered in the market. We actually asked, what is the greatest advantage of increased automation? And for 48%, they said it was actually about consistency. Another 27% said it was about limiting liability. Only 21% said it was really about improving speed and completing the task. And to me, that communicates about IT professionals that just want something to work. If you're going faster in the wrong direction, that's not a good thing. And I think this is also reinforced by another question where we asked, what was the top priority when picking out automation for new software? And 54% said it was about ease of use. They wanted a system that they could just use. Every automation tool that seems to be oriented towards a very specific outcome has its own vernacular and its own setup structure, and it's quite honestly exhausting. Only 12% said it was about cost savings or about productivity. IT professionals just want something that works and that they don't have to spend a lot of time learning how to use. And I think a lot of that actually comes down to the way we think about automation for specific use cases. You can generally bucket automation application into three sort of spheres, where we have the application lifestyle, about how apps are introduced into our organizations and dealt with. You have the user lifecycle, about how these users interact with those apps. And then you have spend optimization, which is about licenses and how much you're actually spending on it. A lot of automation tools are focused on one or two specific aspects related to one of these spheres. Maybe it's just about security reviews, or it's just about cost-saving notifications. But the reality is that we can't treat these three things as if they are isolated, because they are all intrinsically interconnected. The way in which shadow IT infiltrates our organization directly impacts the way in which you deal with offboarding. It directly impacts the way in which you deal with the license count or dealing with cost-saving analysis. And that's really what Torii was about from the beginning, is understanding the way that all of these things are interconnected and designing a platform that is all about ingesting the data from throughout the organization, putting it into one place, cross-referencing it, making sure that that is good, high-integrity data, and then using it to find insights that are helpful, and then being able to take action based on those insights, often through the form of automation. So that's a little bit about Torii at a macro level and kind of understanding our unique perspective on automation. But at this point, I want to turn a little bit and start to talk about the specifics of how we deal with automation for specific use cases within Torii. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is about how to automate the app discovery and review process. I like to say that the way an application is introduced into your organization is kind of like how someone enters a party. You know, the way that it's first introduced, the way it first enters the room really sets the tone for the relationship when it comes to that app and the rest of the organization. And I think nothing is more illustrative to that than shadow IT. When shadow IT kind of slips in, maybe you know it's there, but you maybe don't have the time or the energy to go on a big scavenger hunt to figure out everything that's happening. That immediately sets the tone for your organization's relationship with that application. And it gets messy. And that messiness only gets worse as you deal with things about license count, or you deal with onboarding and offboarding. And so One of the things that Torii does is understanding the importance of that first interaction. And that's why it's set up for continuous and comprehensive app discovery, including shadow IT. Now, when IT professionals first start using Torii, there is nothing quite as satisfying as their reaction to finding out the real count of how many apps are within their company. It's pretty routine for a company to come in and say, we've got 100 to 150 apps. And then they're faced with the reality that it's 300 to 500 sometimes. We very often see a 3x multiplier on that count. And that's an opportunity in that moment. It's a little bit frightening at first, but you realize the opportunity here for cost savings and for optimization of a previously messy SaaS environment. Another thing that's really exciting about Torii is that it's all about transparency. It's about letting the people who need to know about something know about something. So you can set up adoption alerts for relevant stakeholders within the organization. That might be someone from procurement, that might be someone from finance, it might be a manager, it might be someone from InfoSec. The point is that the people who need to know are automatically alerted whenever new applications are added to your environment. Another really powerful capability within Torii is the ability to create these automatic adoption questionnaires for new app owners, where you can ask them about why are you introducing this app into our organization, and really confront it right at the beginning. And there are multiple workflow triggers that you can set up for app security reviews based on whatever criteria you think are appropriate. It could be based on adoption rates, or it could be based on the status of that app when it shifts from initial discovery to evaluation. That's really up to you to decide how you want to address the security aspect of it. So at this point, I'm going to stop and I'm going to jump in and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what I mean within Torii itself. So if we're talking about the app discovery within Torii, here we have some pre-created workflows. And this is a workflow specifically for when a new app is discovered. So you can set this initial trigger for when a new app is discovered. And when that happens, it's going to send an application form. And you can really customize the messaging that you want within this email. So you can decide who it's actually going to come from. You can have it sent to, so in this case, if you select user, it tells you here, the user who started to use the app. And so it's going to go to this user. You can decide your subject line, and you can pre-create your message like this. And this is what it's going to look like from the recipient's perspective. They'll get this nice little aesthetic email that'll say, hey, why did you bring this app into our system? Would you mind answering a few questions about it? They can click on that and they'll be brought to a form. Now, you can customize whatever is inside that form. So you can ask just the questions that are relevant from your perspective, whether that's about budget, whether it's about ownership or anything like that. Another thing that's really interesting to know, and this is something you're going to be seeing with all of these workflow demos, are these kind of grayed out section. These are known as personalization tokens, and it's one of the secret sauce elements to Torii. Now, these personalization tokens are incredibly powerful, and they are dictated by a number of different applications, but most importantly, through whatever you decide to be kind of your primary application for discerning who the users are within the organization. For a lot of companies, that's usually it could be the HR app, like a Bamboo HR. And so it has all of these so that these tokens will automatically adjust to whoever the recipient is. So this one, it'll automatically adjust to whoever that user might be. The name of the application, this will automatically adjust based on the app that's been discovered. And the signature here will automatically be adjusted. All of these things, once they're initially set up with these personalization tokens, can just run in the background, and it'll always deliver custom messages to the individual. So now I'm going to show you what that questionnaire might look like from the user's perspective. So say they click answer the form, and they're going to be presented. And all of these elements are fully customizable, including like this message over here on the side. You get to decide what you want them to answer, what kind of information you need as it relates to the application. And so that's a little bit about how you can set that tone, set the stage for when new applications are introduced into your organization. But once an application has been introduced, what then? Well, the automation doesn't end with that point. In fact, this is where it really opens up. And within Torii, there's well over 100 workflows that are available right off the bat, out of the box. And you can just do some small tweaks around the applications that you want to define some of those key elements. But largely, when you are first getting started with Torii, you have a huge library of workflows ready to start using right away. And these workflows, as you saw in that example, they're all no code and they're fully customizable. And you can get really specific with the kind of triggers and the kind of alerts that you want to leverage. So it can be something like, if you want these workflows to be triggered based on the app approval process, whether it's a risky app that's being adopted or being used, or if it's something that you've determined due to the risk, it shouldn't be used by your organization. If you close that app and then someone goes in and tries to use it in the future, that can also serve as a trigger for a separate workflow. I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. You can also set things up for unused applications. One thing I love is that you can actually look at different applications, filter them according to price, and then look at them based on the usage rate. So you can find those applications that you might be spending a significant amount of money on and nobody's actually using. That gives you immediate opportunities for some ROI right off the bat. You can also look for notifications around things, or you can also set up workflows around user license thresholds, maybe when you reach a certain point of licenses relative to users. You can set things up for upcoming renewals, maybe send alerts to your procurement team. You can identify redundant tech. There's so many different options for ways that you can leverage this workflow technology. So I'll show you just an example of that with the closed app adoption. Let's say hypothetically, there's an application, it went through a security review and it failed. If that's the case, then maybe you wanted to close that app, you don't want anyone else to use it, but maybe Jim over in accounting, he didn't get the memo, so he's going to try to jump in that app or maybe sign up for a new account or something like that. And when that happens, you can set it up so that once it's triggered, closed app in use, it'll send out an email that just says, hey, we noticed that you are using an app that has been closed. And you can decide what kind of course of action you want to take from there, whether it's just about alerting them, asking that they do not use that app, or you can also send notifications to maybe the original, to the app owner for taking specific actions. It's really up to however you decide the best process for your organization, what that is. So we've talked about applications, but now let's talk about the licenses, the way that the users are using these applications. And this is really important, not just from the user access perspective, but also from your bottom line perspective. This is one of the fastest ways that Torii users are able to save a significant amount of money. You can set up workflows for inactivity triggers. This is a really powerful tool that sends alerts and communications based on how long someone goes without using their license for an application. You can also, like I mentioned before, set up a license count threshold so that once the number of licenses that are used relative to available hits a certain point, you can send an alert to someone and just let them know that maybe it's time to get a few more licenses because you've got a bunch of hires coming down the pike. You can also set up systems for auto reclamation of unused or past user licenses. Maybe if there was a recent series of offboarding, you can automate reclaiming those licenses. You can also downgrade underutilized licenses with a feature level usage recommendation. And this is a really powerful tool where for some of the more expensive applications, think of Zoom or Salesforce, where sometimes individuals, maybe they have a license, but they only need a small amount of the features within that. Torii will actually monitor that feature-based usage and send you recommendations, not just for who should have a license removed, but also who should have a license downgraded. And you can use some of the one-click license optimization recommendations that are made available through Torii's license recommendation engine. So real quick, let's look at what that looks like for the inactivity trigger. And so this gives you a lot of options when you're looking at the applications. And if there are some applications where maybe a user hasn't used it in 30 days, this might be an opportunity to look for some savings. So you'll have that initial trigger, and then you'll send them an email. that basically says, this is what it looks like from their perspective. It says, hey, you've got this app, you haven't used it for a long time. Basically, can we reclaim this license? And then they can decide to click here, either approve or decline. And in either case, it'll give them the opportunity to send some feedback in a form. So if they decline it, they might have a good reason, and this gives them the opportunity to say so. But there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing this. I know that at Torii, we've had some fun running different experiments, seeing what were some of the ways we could kind of pose this question in a way that would get a higher response rate. So one of the examples of what we did was we were able to use the personalization token to tell them how much the company would actually save down to the dollar amount, how much they would save by giving up that license. And we saw that when people saw that action, the act of giving up that license, in light of how it was contributing to the company, they were a lot more receptive to it, much more likely to do that. Now, on the flip side, you can also take a more draconian approach where you might actually send out a Slack notification to a supervisor and say, hey, this user hasn't used this license, so we're going to take it. And here you can see, so in an example of like a DocuSign, if they haven't used DocuSign for a prolonged period, then you can have it set up where it'll notify a manager. It'll transfer all of the DocuSign files to that manager, and then it'll close their account. It's really up to you about for which applications, how intense you want to be with the measures you take for getting some of those licenses back and saving some of that money. And like I mentioned, I won't spend much time on here, but you can also set up notifications for maybe an application owner or for whoever is responsible for purchasing more licenses. You can have them receive an alert whenever that ratio hits a certain point where they might want to invest in picking up some more licenses. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the automatic cost savings. We've talked a lot about how you can save costs in the form of that license optimization, but there's actually even more tools under the surface with Torii. You can use features like the license cost benchmarking, which will give your procurement team or whoever is going into negotiation, it gives them some more leverage whenever they're coming to the table and they want to talk about how to get the best deal for their organization. You can also set up automatic alerts for new SaaS spending and unused apps. You can do tech stack reduction with a side-by-side app comparison. You see that happening right here on this animated GIF here. Where it'll actually show something like a Monday.com and an Asana, and it'll show you side by side the usage trends over time, the contract terms, and it'll even give you a Venn diagram that'll show you the overlap of which users are using one, the other, or both, so that you can make a more informed opinion about how to kind of reduce those duplicate or redundant pieces of technology. You can also set up a dynamic renewal calendar that will provide those automatic reminders to your procurement team or whoever is responsible for renewing those contracts. And you can set up a workflow for when a contract meets criteria. And so an example of that, like we talked about with the renewal calendar, you can say that based on those personalization tokens, let's say a contract in it, you have a designated date for the renewal, and you can set up a workflow so that within 60 days of that, you'll send out a Slack notification or an email alert to the individuals who should know about it and give them plenty of time to prepare so that you don't have those surprise contract negotiations that just seem to pop up out of nowhere. All right, and the last area that we're really going to talk about here is around how to automate the employee lifecycle. Now, at the beginning, we won't spend a lot of time here because at the beginning, like I mentioned, the onboarding and offboarding is something that a lot of organizations do have some tool in place for. I think in our survey, it was about 69% had automation for onboarding and 64% for offboarding. So those were by far the most highly adopted for automation technology. And Torii has some great solutions for that as well. There's scheduled onboarding and offboarding that I'll talk about a little bit more in just a moment. But you can also trigger workflows from external ITSM tools, things like Jira using Torii's APIs. You can also set up group-based provisioning by role, by team, or even by department. You can also take matters into your own hand or let the system handle it when it comes to the method of offboarding. So you can have automated real-time offboarding, or you can have delegated offboarding via a ticketing system. Now we integrate with a number of ticketing systems. We also have a deep integration with Jira, and this one actually operates as kind of a two-way communication between Torii and Jira, so that when actions are accomplished within Jira, it'll actually notify you back within Torii, so that not only are you able to delegate through Torii, but you're also able to monitor the progress of those actions through Torii. And then we can also set up event-based user access triggers. So say someone moves to a new department, they get promoted, someone goes on maternity leave. You can set up workflows for all of these different instances and how it might mean suspending some licenses. It might mean swapping out a whole set of tools. It's really up to you with how specific you want to get. And finally, Torii has a self-service app catalog, which is a sanctioned way for users to be able to request new applications or to request access to existing applications you already have within your system. Now, coming back to that scheduled onboarding and offboarding, this is actually a new feature within Torii. And it's a really exciting one because it's something that IT professionals have been begging for a long time. So I'll show you a quick example of what that looks like in practice. So this is especially important when you consider that a lot of times a lot of the hang up for the initial onboarding process is about having access to technology right away. So we're going to build this workflow where our user meets a criteria. We're going to set up a criteria, and we're going to have the information that initiates the trigger for this is going to be based on our HR system. So we'll select Bamboo HR, and we're going to say their hire date. So when the Bamboo hire date is today. Now, in terms of scheduling this out, now what we want to do is right down here, click on schedule, hit that toggle, and then we can actually set it up. So this is operating Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. and then you set the time zone. So what we've essentially done is put it in the position where when someone is hired, the HR system, when that hire date is today, 8 a.m. of that hire date, you'll be able to kick off a workflow, set up which apps you want to add them to, which groups you want to add them to, Slack channels, all of those things you can have right here within Torii, so that the minute they join the company, they're ready to hit the ground running and get started. So that's a little bit about Torii. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go over the success story, but after this webinar, we'll send you a link to this case study where Bobby Abdullah of Gorillas was able to share his story about how their organization saved 1,300 hours on SaaS tasks. And a lot of that really came down to him being able to support other departments within the organization and find out ways that he could help them and essentially become a hero to those different groups within the organization. Because Bobby understood what we were talking about at the beginning with those different spheres, how they're all actually intricately interconnected. And by properly understanding that and by leveraging a tool that also understood that, he was able to really help his organization. But in the interest of time right now, we're going to transition over to some questions and answers. I want to thank you once again for your time and attention and pass it back to Tracy, who's going to take it from here.
Thank you, John. We do have some questions here. The first question is, for the license not in use workflow, can you select the licenses you want in the trigger, and is it just for 30 days?
That's a great question. So a lot of times you're going to see that there's a difference in terms of these license and activity between different kinds of licenses. So if someone is not using Zoom on a regular basis or within 30 days, they're probably not using Zoom. If someone doesn't use maybe Figma, or someone is not using Tableau or one of those other tools where maybe you don't need it on a daily basis, something like that, it might be a different consideration. So to answer that question, yes, you have control over which applications, you have control over how many days need to elapse before it's considered inactive. It really gives you all of the control to handle all of those things.
Great. The next question, what actions does Torii have for different apps? If Torii does not have the action that I need, can I create it?
Yeah. Okay. So within Torii, there are ways that you can set up, we call them custom HTTP actions. And these are ones that will often kind of happen in an advanced workflow through other tools like a Workato or Zapier, so that you can set up the integrations using webhooks. As long as those other tools have a REST API that's available, you can absolutely set up your own custom actions for different tools outside of Torii. That being said, a lot of those really important actions are handled within Torii. So things like Google is a great example where there are dozens of actions that are immediately available versus some of the other ones where there's just less that actually happens within that application. And so for some of those more robust tools, there are a lot of actions that are available. It's not a one size fits all.
Okay, next question. Can I save the questionnaire responses, or is it only through email?
Yes, so those questionnaire responses, you can send them so that they go to someone via email. You can copy that out. But all of those answers are also stored within the info tab within Torii. So within Torii, if you go to the applications tab, you select an application, you can look at something called info, and that'll have a list of everything that you need to know. You can set up custom fields for whatever kind of information you want to track about your applications. It's all stored within there, kind of going back to what I talked about earlier about how Torii is about centralizing, pulling all that information. It really is designed to become a SaaS system of record.
Great. Next question. How does Torii do discovery for shadow IT?
That's a great example, or a great question, something I maybe should have delved into a little bit more on. So when we talk about, I'm just going to open it up real quick. When we talk about the shadow IT discovery within Torii, it's important to understand that there's not one single mechanism or one single source. Let me navigate over here to the applications tab. And you can see right here, this is a great example. So when I see right here, there's a column for sources, and you can see that there's actually multiple sources indicating where that data is coming from. Something like Asana, it's connected to Torii directly. It was discovered through a browser extension. It's connected to their Google account. It's connected through Okta. Someone connected it to Slack. There's also we have a NetSuite integration for expenses. There's a lot of different methods that we use, and that's all about trying to construct this high integrity data so that you can really trust the information that's coming in here. And it also is a way that we don't have to rely on some other forms of discovery that can sometimes be problematic, things like software agents or other mechanisms that might be seen as an invasion of privacy.
That's actually a perfect segue. We had another question about the topic of agents. Does Torii use agents?
Okay, that's a really great question. I want to congratulate the person who asked that question. So agents are kind of a tricky topic. It's one of those things of there's a lot of possibility associated with it. Like it can do a lot. For those who don't know, a software agent is basically a little autonomous piece of software that's operating on your local system that is operating on behalf of something else. It's very common with something like Jamf, where it's on your system, but it's there to monitor for security purposes. Sometimes other software vendors will use an agent and introduce it to your system. And if you talk with security nerds, they'll tell you that that should immediately raise a little bit of a red flag. And that's because that can actually operate as a little bit of a vulnerability. It can actually pose a lot of problems. It's also a bit of a maintenance nightmare where agents that are on your local system can eat up a lot of your battery performance. They can really harm your CPU, your memory, all of those things. So Torii, we actually made the intentional decision to avoid or to not use an agent because of all those problems, because of the Pandora's box it can sometimes be, and instead rely on multiple other sources to construct that picture instead.
Great. Thank you, John. That's all the time we have for today. If we didn't get a chance to answer your question, we'll be sure to follow up after the webinar. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.